Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off, because today I am going to share my absolute favorite tabletop role-playing games, which I had an opportunity to experience and review in 2022. And we'll get stuck in right after this. Howdy, 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 gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. As mentioned in the open, today I am going to be sharing my absolute favorite tabletop role-playing games, which I got a chance to experience and review in 2022. Gotta point out, around this time of year, I normally will share two videos. One is my favorite board games of the year, and the other is my favorite role-playing games of the year. This year, I'm not going to be sharing a board game video, and that's because I really didn't get an opportunity to play enough board games and review enough board games. Life bit me in the butt this year. A lot of things were going on. Just didn't have opportunities to get together with the gang to play games enough times to share solid reviews for you to utilize. So I don't feel right sharing a board game video. But I got to experience a slew of excellent role-playing games. Now, this is my favorites video. This is not best of 2022. For one, reviews are subjective, and I know a lot of people don't agree with my assessments of role-playing games or board games, and I don't agree with other people's assessments. So to each their own. So these are my favorites. Also, not all of these releases came out in 2022. Some of them came out a bit earlier, but they were new to me this year, and I did review them this year too. All of these that we're going to be taking a look at have scored a 9 or higher out of 10, out of 0 to 10. So these are exceptional releases, at least in my opinion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a couple of minutes as I page through, talk a little bit about each of these releases, what I think makes it stand out, what I really liked about it as well. These are all presented in alphabetical order, so well, it's not like we're counting down or anything like that. So first up, we're going to talk about Best Left Buried Deeper from SoulMuppet Publishing. Now, of course, the Best Left Buried role-playing game has been out longer than this year, but I do believe this hardcover appeared for the first time this year. Regardless, let's take a peek and let me tell you a bit about Best Left Buried Deeper. If you're not familiar with Best Left Buried, it's a fantasy role-playing game. It is pretty rules light, and it has a bit of an old school mentality with new school mechanics. So we've got 3 core attributes as opposed to our traditional 6. It's very easy to jump in, make a character sheet. We've got cool archetypes that pretty much set the player character's role in their group. Something I think is really cool is the players all take on the roles of crypt diggers. And crypt diggers are adventurers or explorers. They search out tombs and crypts and dungeons and wilderness ruins. This is not just a dungeon delving game by any stretch of the imagination. It is super easy to jump into. And one thing that really stands out about this volume is that the 3 core books are all contained within. And about half of the page count is devoted to game masters. And if you like that old school rolling on tables to get your juices flowing, or to learn about a region or a town or NPCs or loot, then you are definitely going to dig Best Left Buried. There is just loads and loads of content in this book to get you started. Really like this a lot. And if you are interested in kind of an old school vibe without having to go to a retro clone as an example, or actually just go right to the source, definitely recommend Best Left Buried for those who want more of a rules light approach to their fantasy role playing. Should point out, you're probably going to get tired of hearing about Chaosium Inc. in this video, but every time I turn around this past year, and to be very honest, in the most recent few years, Chaosium Inc. is just knocking it out of the park. Just one top-notch release after another. 2022 was no different. So first up, let's talk about A Time to Harvest for Call of Cthulhu. So this is a campaign set in the 1930s, and each of the players are going to take on the role of a student at, you guessed it, Miskatonic University. So this was originally presented as an organized play series. And I gotta say, Chaosium Inc. really went out with the organized play series to have, gamers come to their friendly local game store and play Call of Cthulhu. But they have gone way beyond that with this release. This is packed with adventure. And I think it's really cool because your main baddies are my favorite mythos race. And the players are actually going to have human adversaries as well. Everything in this book is top-notch, presentation quality, really, really well done. The maps, the handouts, all really, really good. And something that I have noticed recently, let's say over the past year or so, that Chaosium has done very well is presentation of NPCs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we take a peek at another Call of Cthulhu release from this year. So we have pre-gens. We get a lot of pre-generated characters, and definitely like the artwork on these pre-gens too. Altogether, very cool campaign. There is a lot of adventure packed in these pages. This is not a campaign book where 4 or 5 sessions is all it's going to take for you to wrap things up. Absolutely not. Really, really well done. And should point out, a good amount of this takes place in Lovecraft country. Although one aspect that I wasn't so keen on is if you're playing Pulp Cthulhu, you've got an additional chapter at the end that your player characters will no doubt probably experience that classic Call of Cthulhu players probably won't. I thought that was a little odd. But it is A Time to Harvest from Chaosium Inc. Moving right along, another Call of Cthulhu release that was eagerly anticipated by many gamers was Call of Cthulhu, Cults of Cthulhu. And for the first time, we actually have a source book that dives into cults and actually creating cults. So let's take a peek here. We actually have some adventures in here as well. So this just isn't a source book, but we get some examples of different types of cults and how very, very different they can be and have absolutely different approaches. We have various different time periods as well. So this does not only take place during the classic Call of Cthulhu period of the 20s and 30s. We have the 60s, we have modern day, and we have a lot of information about creating your own cults. How do they finance themselves? How do they recruit members? What are their goals? Really, really well done. And then we have a trio of adventures, one in the 20s, one in the 60s, and the other nowadays. And of course, they all have to do with cults. I really like this book quite a lot. I know there are a ton of gamers out there who were really, really pleased with Cults of Cthulhu. The adventures are solid throughout. I believe the last one was my favorite, and it's actually the longest. But this is another book that you're not looking at, okay, 3 adventures, so it's 3 sessions. No, absolutely not. So that is Cults of Cthulhu for Call of Cthulhu. Our final Call of Cthulhu entry actually just came out very recently. I shared my review of it just a few days ago, and that is Call of Cthulhu Regency Cthulhu. And if you are not familiar with the Regency era, it is the period of English history from 1811 to 1820. Regency television shows have been popular for a long time. They're very, very popular right now. And, of course, the novels of Jane Austen and Charles Dickens have always been popular, at least from the 20th century on. I know Jane Austen, during her lifetime, strangely enough, nobody knew Jane Austen was writing those novels. It was actually something that's touched upon in this book, which I didn't know. I had no idea. I did not realize that her books were published not necessarily like under a pseudonym or anything like that, but almost kind of anonymously until her brother, who, if memory serves, was actually her kind of like literary agent, revealed it after her death. So we've got new options, new rules, new occupations, all set in this Regency era. And we also have a town, a country town, Terryford, that we get a lot of information about. We get tons of NPCs to populate this town. And as I started to mention with A Time to Harvest, I love what Chaosium Inc. has been doing with their presentation of NPCs. Reading through these NPCs, and you don't have to read 3-4 pages of background. Just a few paragraphs, some bullet points. But every one of these, you read through their bio and you're like, yeah, you know what? I can certainly role play them at the table. So we've got 2 adventures, both take place in Terryford. First one takes place in 1813. The second takes place about a year later. And you can kind of drop some hints, some foreshadowing for the second adventure during the first. And the adventures are solid. They're a little similar in vibe. I talk about that in my review. But really, that's kind of the only serious critique I have about Regency Cthulhu. There are pre-generated characters, which also happen to be very important NPCs. So if your players don't want to use the pre-gens, they don't have to. You've got those NPCs. But if they do use the pre-gens, they have connections and they have investment already because they were NPCs in the adventure. Plus, if you lose investigators, it's a nice way to quickly replace them without having to roll up brand new characters. Really, really like Regency Cthulhu a ton, and I'm really looking forward to when we get our Cthulhu by Gaslight, which might be this year. I mean, as in 2023. Might be after that, but it is going to be in good hands. So this is Call of Cthulhu Regency Cthulhu. So there's a fantasy role-playing game that I'd heard about for a long time. Never had an opportunity to check out until the fine folks over at Trollord Games provided me with a series of game books for Castles and Crusades. Boy, I tell you, this is a fun fantasy role-playing game, which feels crunchy, but it's not. Best way to describe Castles and Crusades, I guess, is to actually use Gary Gygax's own words, where he felt that if there had been a third edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Castles and Crusades would have been it. And I would say that is mighty high praise. Production quality of all the books I've taken a look at from Castles and Crusades, top notch. This has an old school approach, old school style, but modern flair. I think that would be how I would best describe it. All your action resolutions, all done D20. You've got a lot more character optimization than you would have, say, even in AD&D, more so, in my opinion, than you have in 5e. So if you feel that 5e doesn't have enough character customization, maybe not enough crunch, but on the other hand, Pathfinder 2nd edition has too many options, maybe it's got a little too much complexity for your group or for you as a game master, look no further than Castles and Crusades. There is loads and loads of content out there. The PDFs are very affordable if you don't want to grab the hardcover books, and you really only need 2 core books. So you've got the Player's Handbook, you've got the Castle Keeper's Guide, and then you've got the Monster Guide, Monster Manual. I forget which it's called. You only need the Player's Handbook, which is what I'm sharing with you right now, and the Monster Book, and you're all set. You're all good to go. The Castle Keeper's Guide is not the equivalent of the Dungeon Master's Guide. It is all optional content. This is a very modular sort of game as well, so you can plug in things you like, unplug things you don't. And that Castle Keeper's Guide has a lot of advice on running the game as well. But this is just jam-packed with content. That is Castles and Crusades. This is the Player's Handbook we were just taking a peek at. So let's talk a little bit about modern horror. So when we're talking modern horror, modern mythos horror, tend to not have to look any further than Delta Green. And we've got Iconoclasts from Arc Dream Publishing. So if you're familiar with Delta Green, usually your player characters have like a law enforcement background or military background or like civilian aviation, things like that. This is kind of a military campaign. Now, the player characters do not have to be military, but this takes place in Mosul. In fact, there's a scenario where it's early on in this campaign where the player characters actually take on the roles of ISIL fighters. So this is written for a mature audience. This is not for the, 10, 11, 12-year-old role players out there. This is for a much more mature player, a much more mature game master. And this is one creepy adventure. I should say campaign. But it is really good as well. But this is not something to bust out, with the kids for, an evening of role-playing adventuring. Iconoclasts for Delta Green Really, really enjoyed it. Gotta say, Arc Dream Publishing, they don't come out with a ton of stuff. They usually have maybe 1 or 2 releases a year, but they tend to be really, really good. And Iconoclasts is absolutely no exception to that. So, one of the big Modiphius Entertainment role-playing games that was released was Dune, Adventures in the Imperium. And they've done a really, really nice job with it. So they released this box set, which is the first chapter in an adventure campaign. But it's also kind of a starter set. So you can actually play this adventure and kick off the campaign without going and purchasing the core book, because a good number of the rules are already located in Agents of Dune. So I want to show you this because we have gotten a bunch of just absolutely amazing starter sets over the past couple of years. And this includes, of course, we've got our adventure book, which also has the rules as well. We've got a bunch of handouts. We've got tokens. We have really nice pre-generated player characters, as well as decks of cards with NPCs and plot points and equipment. And we've got a bunch of 20-sided dice because Dune uses Modiphius's 2D20 engine. Although I have to say that it is a bit lighter rule crunch-wise than, say, Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of. It tends to be kind of middle of the road. And the adventure itself is a what if. It is what if the player character's house was chosen by the Emperor to oversee the spice mining on Arrakis. It is really, really well done. Dune is more of a storytelling sort of role-playing game. It has acts, it has scenes. It is rather linear, but still, this adventure is really, really well done. Not a ton of artwork like you would see, say, in the core rulebook, but that means you're getting loads of content. Plus, you've got all those cool handouts and player and NPC cards to take a peek at to keep you entertained visually. So, wow, really, really well done by Modiphius Entertainment. And there is also the second chapter of this campaign is, I believe it is out now. I have not had an opportunity to check it out, though. If you follow the Gaming Gang, you know that I say quite often there are 2 major publishers, or at least 2 major publishers of role-playing games that I feel just are constantly releasing just really, really impressive and interesting setting books and adventures. Don't get me wrong, but their settings are just really, really amazing for the most part. And one of those is Kobold Press. Now, of course, Empire of the Ghouls is an adventure. It is not a setting book. I am going to show one of the setting books from Kobold Press towards the end of this video. But this is Empire of the Ghouls, and yes, this came out before 2022. This is the collector's edition, which Wolfgang Bauer was kind enough to provide me, which also leads me to point out all of these books that we're looking at, all of these releases we're looking at, were all provided by the publishers for review, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this coverage with you. It's important to know that these days. So Empire of the Ghouls is a fantastically exciting and unique campaign for 5e. I have to say, Kobold Press, at least in my opinion, is releasing far more interesting material for 5e than Wizards of the Coast. Now, that's not to say that everything from WotC is trash. Absolutely not. I have reviewed just about everything that's come out for D&D over the past few years. Actually, pretty much since maybe a year after 5e came out. So there's stuff I like, but just not as much on a consistent basis as I do from Kobold Press. So this takes place in the world of Midgard, which I reviewed that source book and absolutely loved it. So this is an adventure. A lot of it's going to take place in the underworld. You're going to deal with a lot of undead, ghouls specifically, but the ghouls actually have their own civilization. The various different races and cultures are not just the same kind of canned high fantasy, epic fantasy sort of cultures that we tend to consider to be tropes. These are very unique, and there's a lot of like background history that goes into these adventures and source books from Kobold Press. This is an epic campaign. It really is. So when your player characters complete it, they are going to feel like they have really made an impact on the game world. And it's because they have. And as you can see, artwork throughout, really, really well done. But that's pretty much what we've come to expect from the folks over at Kobold Press. So this is Empire of the Ghouls for 5e from Kobold Press. Another game that's been out for a bit, but this was a new edition, or at least a new presentation that I received a review, is the index card role-playing game from Runehammer, and this is actually available through Modiphius Entertainment. And I had always heard really good things about ICRPG, and those people were not lying. This role-playing game is just so much fun. That's the best way that I can explain it overall. To sum it up, you're going to have a lot of fun. It is rules light, but rules light does not mean simple. It just means there aren't a lot of mechanics that you have to memorize. And you can easily get people started playing at the table within just a few minutes when you go over, just a series of different rules. So essentially what's going on is whatever location your player characters may be, could be a room in a dungeon, it could be a saloon in the Old West, on board the bridge of a starship, maybe on the rooftop of a skyscraper for like superhero action. Wherever they're at, there's going to be a target number on a d20 that they have to meet or exceed to succeed in whatever actions they're taking, be it doing some sort of a special feat, attacking, so on and so forth. That is their one challenge number that they have to overcome. So it makes things really, really simple. There are 5 different settings that are included in this book. If I remember right, I think this book clocks in at 400 pages. So you've got a fantasy setting, you've got a science fiction setting, you've got a Weird West setting, you've got a superhero setting. So any genre you're considering, any major genre, there's even prehistoric adventure as far as a setting, all within your reach in ICRPG. And this is another game that's kind of got an old school vibe to it, but very, very modern approach. And this is another game book that you can tell the author just loves playing role-playing games and running role-playing games. So if you maybe have some younger players or some complete newcomers to tabletop role-playing games, maybe you're an absolute beginner as well, Index Card RPG is a great introduction to our hobby, and it doesn't hurt that it's loads of fun. So I just talked about how I feel Kobold Press is one of two publishers that just does these fantastic releases for the most part. Not everything that comes out from Kobold Press is fantastic. There have been some clunkers, yes, but batting average wise, really, really high. The other company is Paizo Inc. and Pathfinder 2E. The City of Absalom book is just amazing. It really, really is. It is just overloaded with gazetteer information, but also gameable material as well. So that's one of the things that I find in the Pathfinder books. Now, this is a Lost Omens book. So Lost Omens books tend to be more focused on background, history. It's a gazetteer, essentially. It's not necessarily going to be a lot of new player character options or classes or archetypes or backgrounds and things like that. So it's important to keep that in mind. That is kind of what the Lost Omens line tends to be. Not always, but it does tend to be. But the City of Absalom is hella cool. It really, really is. And if you are looking at kind of setting a campaign, an ongoing campaign in a city that's really going to stand out, you want to take a look at this. Should also mention that this information is easily portable over to 5e and just about any other fantasy role-playing game, really, because you're not going to find a ton of mechanics and a bunch of numbers and things like that. Now, there are. We do get an adventure toolbox at the end, but we get all the important NPCs of the city. We get tons and tons of adventure nuggets and adventure hooks, and each of the various different areas are tackled and discussed, and there's a lot of uniqueness to this as well. It is not just, oh, it's another rehash of Lankmar or anything along those lines. Not at all. Really, really well done, and pretty solid page count here also. So this is Absalom, City of Lost Omens for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I also want to mention another release for Pathfinder, and this is another pretty recent review, Impossible Lands. And Impossible Lands is a region guide, but there is a lot of player-facing material as well. If you're familiar with the Gaming Gang, if you visit thegaminggang.com, you know Sammy Uhas provides a lot of reviews for Pathfinder and Starfinder. In fact, she normally does the reviews for the adventure paths, as well as some of the major releases. Some I tackle as well. Now, just this month, I rolled out a new series that is going to be monthly, and it is the Paizo Preview, where I am going to share first looks at everything physical that's releasing from Paizo Inc. So I am also going to tend to read through the various different adventure paths. So as we're taking a look at the latest chapters each month, I'll have a bit of knowledge, well, still trying to avoid spoilers, about each of the adventure paths. So we have new cultures, we've got new backgrounds, new archetypes, we've got new gear. Each of these regions is going to have a section presenting us with new gear. These are regions which also have had adventure paths, at least 2 of them have had adventure paths published. In fact, the current Bloodlords adventure path for Pathfinder, which just wrapped up this month, takes place in one of the regions. Artwork throughout, really, really well done. There are a couple of ho-hum pieces of artwork, but for the most part, very, very uniform. Awesome maps. A lot of cool detail. A lot of cool history. It's not just history for the sake of just, info dumping on you. It's stuff that you can use. And if you're a game master, it's not like you have to memorize all this stuff. It's just really there to help get those creative juices flowing, at least for me. And each of these regions is very unique from one another. They're not all just, oh, look, it's a desert land. Oh, they all have pyramids. Oh, look at that. Oh, they all have tombs and mummies. No, absolutely not. So really, really top notch. Really enjoyed this a lot. And even though there is a good amount of player-facing material and like bestiary with new creatures and new gear and things like that, you could still easily incorporate this into other fantasy role-playing games. So this is Pathfinder. This is Impossible Lands. This is not a Lost Omens title, as you can see. So this is a Pathfinder title, which, of course, it's still Galarian and everything. But usually, as I mentioned, if it's a Lost Omens book, it's more gazetteer, it's more setting. Whereas if it's not, then you tend to have a lot of more player character options and gear and monsters and so forth. Gameable material is how I like to refer to it. Once again, that is Pathfinder Impossible Lands from the fine folks over at Paizo Inc. So I know there are folks out there who are fans of the gaming gang. They hang out, they watch the live streams, they hang out in chat, who love the old school. And I'm right with you. I love me some OSR. Some of the drama that comes with it, maybe not, but I really like the old school Renaissance. And a lot of people ask me, what do you recommend if I want to say I want to run the old D&D modules or the old AD&D modules, but I don't want to have to fight my way through those rule books. Well, I always tell them to check out Old School Essentials from Necrotic Gnome. Now, this is the classic tome, so this is essentially basic expert Dungeons and Dragons. This is a retro clone, so it is cleaned up as far as the presentation. Makes more sense when you're reading it. Will mention that you don't really have content about how do you run a role-playing game, or what is a role-playing game, like we tend to see a lot of times with even the retro clones. So this is essentially a rules tome, but it is so well done. And yes, I know we just had another printing, or print run, I should say, of the booklets for both the classic rules tome as well as the advanced fantasy, which I have as well. So when I'm talking about Old School Essentials, I'm giving a huge thumbs up to the classic rules tome as well as the advanced fantasy. So in essence, there's 3 books, but the thing is, if you don't have any interest in, say, approaching advanced D&D designed for basic expert, then you don't need to pick up advanced fantasy. If you're more interested in an AD&D style game with a lot more options, race and class separate, then you might want to go with the advanced fantasy instead of the classic rules. So those are options available to you. Now, this has everything you need for a BX D&D experience all in one book. And it's got that kind of classic black and white D&D style artwork. Just reading through this brought back a lot of memories because, yes, I was around when D&D was first coming out. So, especially Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But this is just jam-packed with goodness. And of course, you can use this to run pretty much, without having to change a whole lot, pretty much any basic expert adventure and even AD&D as well. Really, really top-notch work from Necrotic Gnome. Can't recommend Old School Essentials high enough to be completely honest. So once again, this is the classic rules tome. So if you have no interest in like the AD&D, options and various more classes and stuff, all in one book, and PDFs very affordable as well. Speaking of old school, gotta say that I was super impressed with the Original Adventures Reincarnated lineup from Goodman Games. I'm not sure if they're discontinuing this line. There's been discussion, kind of like rumors flying around. I don't know for sure because I'm not necessarily, right on top of everything going on with Goodman Games. But a lot of people have thought, well, maybe Goodman Games isn't going to make these anymore because they're only available through Amazon. Maybe they're just selling off stock once the 7th volume arrives, which is actually a Judges Guild product, not a TSR product, because the first 6 volumes all tackle modernizing classic D&D adventures. We've got basic D&D, we've got expert D&D, we also have AD&D. And depending on the adventure, those were what they were originally for, and of course, they're now converted to 5th edition. And as this series has gone on, I really think it's improved. I think it's really improved quite a bit. So you'll get a copy of the original adventure. Some of the volumes actually include multiple copies of the original adventure because there was some sort of a change between print runs. Personally, I think it's kind of silly, but these are also kind of almost like coffee table books. So they're designed to not only update classic adventures to 5e, but also to kind of provide some, nostalgia, a look back at that period of tabletop role-playing. And of course, with the conversions, we get the cool, Goodman Games style maps that we're used to seeing in Dungeon Crawl Classics, as well as that same sort of kind of old school black and white artwork too. I have really enjoyed the Goodman Games Original Adventures Reincarnated series. I still have my review of the Temple of Elemental Evil that I have to shoot, and that will wrap up. I gotta say, a follower of the Gaming Gang, a fan of the Gaming Gang, actually sent me all 6 volumes to share with the viewers, with the gang. And I was like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. It was very, very cool. So as you can see, there's a lot to these books as well. So, you figure many of these original modules for D&D, AD&D, some were as short as 16 pages or 32 pages. If you got a 64-page module, you were like, oh my gosh, this is jam-packed. Well, as you can see, far more than that in these original adventures reincarnated. Once again, highly, highly recommend. From volume 3 on, I really recommend. The first two, oh, they're fine, just not my favorites. So something else that came along, talking about old school, that I thought was really, really cool, and it is actually designed specifically for old school essentials, but once again, you can use it with any sort of retro clone, fantasy role-playing retro clone, and that's Rackham Vale. And it's actually adventuring. It's a setting that's inspired by the artwork of Arthur Rackham. I thought, wow, that's really cool. And it is from Crowbar Creative. Now, this is the color edition. The first edition that came out was in black and white, or I guess we would say grayscale. And this is just really, really interesting. And it has kind of a fairy tale kind of vibe to it, to the proceedings, but dark fairy tales. We're talking about, you know, the Brothers Grimm, not Disney. So really, really dug this a lot. And one of the aspects of this that I think probably impressed me the most is how interconnected Crowbar Creative made this. So this area here, this encounter here, this NPC here has these connections to these other areas and these other NPCs. Really, really like the additional thought that went into this, because it's not just here's an encounter, here's an encounter, here's an encounter. This feels like a living, breathing region. And that is Rackham Vale from Crowbar Creative. So were you tired of hearing about Chaosium Inc. yet? Well, I have one more entry that I want to share with you that is from Chaosium Inc. And it is the RuneQuest Starter Set. And it is oh so good. It is really, really outstanding. Chaosium has done really nice starter sets, but completely truthful, I think the RuneQuest Starter Set kind of blows it out of the water. It kind of does. This is just so jam-packed with goodies. So you get a set of dice, kind of a read me first. We got a bunch of pre-generated characters. It's not just 3 or 4, maybe 5. We've got loads of pre-gens. So if there's a particular type of character that a player is going to want to take on, they're covered. They really are. And then we also get some blank character sheets that we can utilize. I got a bunch of handouts, a bunch of player aids. We get maps, and then we get a bunch of books. So we have a rule book, which is going to lay down all the information you need to get started playing and running RuneQuest. It is a D100 percentile dice based system. In fact, if you've played Call of Cthulhu or any number of percentile systems, then you can thank RuneQuest, because this, to my knowledge, was the first. And the setting is just a treat. It really is. This is kind of a Bronze Age sort of technological level, but there is magic. But this is not a high fantasy sort of setting. Just kind of give you an idea of the rules. We've got the world of Glorantha. And as you can see, the page counts for these books are nothing to sneeze at. We're not looking at 20-page booklets here. Each of these has like 60 pages. And then we get a solitaire adventure to help you learn the rules. Something Chaosium has done a bit more. They've got a couple of solo Call of Cthulhu adventures, which are kind of along the lines of create your own adventures, but they introduce you to the various different mechanics of the game. And then we have an adventure book, which just doesn't feature a single adventure. There are a few adventures in here. RuneQuest is a very, very unique setting. And its creator, Greg Stafford, spent over 40 years working on it. And that love and detail really shines through. It really does. I'm actually rolling out a new series in 2023, and I'm calling it Why You Should Play. And then I share a role-playing game and talk about why I think you should play it. And the first video actually tackles RuneQuest, because I think RuneQuest deserves a whole lot more love than it might currently get. It is popular, don't get me wrong. This isn't like nobody knows about RuneQuest, but there's a lot going on to this game, and it is not mechanically like anything else outside of other role-playing games from Chaosium Inc. So that is the RuneQuest Starter Set. One of the best role-playing game starter sets that you can find. So let's jump back to Kobold Press, because their Southlands book is loads and loads of fun. This is a setting book, and it is a bit of Egyptian flavor, and it's got these cat folk. And of course, there's the City of Cats, which is an adventure book that's set in the Southlands. And once again, it is another setting book from Kobold Press that you read through it and you're like, oh man, I just want to run adventures in this setting. It sounds like it is just a blast. So just to take a quick peek here. So this has a very Egyptian, Middle Eastern, Persian sort of feel to the proceedings and influence to the architecture and fashions. And there is a lot going on in the Southlands. And this is another region guide where it's mainly gazetteer, but each of these regions are very, very unique. And it's not just simply the same old high fantasy European settings that we've kind of grown up with fantasy role-playing games, which over the past 10 years especially, we've seen a break from. So loads and loads going on. And this is another one of these sort of source books that you read through it and you can't decide which of these regions you would want to run adventures in first, because they are that good, they are that interesting, and there are a lot of cultures available to the players as far as characters. So we do get some deities. We have a bit of a bestiary in this as well. We get some monsters, not a ton, but we do get a few. And as you can see, artwork throughout, as we expect from Kobold Press, really, really well done. So that is the Southlands World Book. Of course, this is for 5th edition D&D, because that's pretty much what Kobold Press releases. But again, not a lot of mechanical numbers within this, so you can easily adapt this to just about any other fantasy role-playing game, and I really like it quite a lot. So there is one last entry that I want to share, and this is another one of those entries where it's kind of the whole range, and that is the director's cut of The Enemy Within for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay from Cubicle 7 Entertainment. I have really dug all of the chapters as well as the companions that are available as well. And I really think that the team who have worked with Graham Davis to, modernize and build upon the classic Warhammer Fantasy role-playing campaign, The Enemy Within, or just yeoman's work. This is really a fun adventure. It is 5 books, and of course there are 5 companions as well. The companions sort of flesh out each of these chapters. They also include mechanics that can be used for any adventure, as well as some additional encounters and adventures that you can utilize during that particular chapter. So as an example, this is the Horned Rat. This is the 4th chapter of the 5 in Enemy Within. And of course, there is also a Horned Rat companion that can be utilized. And these books are packed. These are packed with gameable material. Now, of course, there's plenty of illustrations throughout, but Cubicle 7 Entertainment tends to, especially with their Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay releases, they really cram a lot of adventure, a lot of content within the page space. So I would say with the releases for Enemy Within, the director's cut, they run, 160, 180 pages. But you're looking at like as much adventuring as you would find in like 250 pages of some other role-playing game releases. I love the bit of sense of humor that Enemy Within has. So I've certainly enjoyed that throughout. And I have the conclusion Empire in Ruins reviews for both the core and the companion on the very near horizon. All right, so these are my absolute favorite tabletop gaming releases that I had an experience to check out in 2022. There are some honorable mentions I want to toss out there real quick. Haunted West from Darker Hue Studios. Really dug that. It did score in the range for it to be included in this video. I no longer have it. It was something that I knew was just going to sit on the shelf, and someone had really wanted it. So it is now in a good home. Also, there are plenty of adventures and source books that my other correspondents, such as Sammy Uhas, have reviewed in the past year. And I know, like, Sammy absolutely loved the Strength of Thousands adventure path for Pathfinder 2e. The They Came From series, like, they came from beneath the sea, or they came from beyond the grave, as I like to say, which is from Onyx Path Publishing. Of course, we had core rulebook updates for the Traveler role-playing game from Mongoose Publishing, which got reviews of those out there, pretty highly rated. And of course, I know there's going to be folks out there wondering, wait a second, Jeff, where's Free League Publishing? Where's Wizards of the Coast? Well, Free League Publishing came out with a lot of very good to great releases this year none of them got a 9 out of 10. I was surprised going back through everything that they were always around 8, 8.5. So once again, I had reserved this video for tabletop gaming releases which received a 9 or higher out of 10, and nothing this year from Free League Publishing hit that score. Now, that is not to say there isn't a lot of awesome stuff from Free League Publishing, and I've got more reviews of Free League releases in the future. They just didn't hit 9 out of 10. Wizards of the Coast didn't really come close. So I want to say the highest reviewed WotC release got an 8 out of 10. So, I mean, there were good things that came out from Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons & Dragons this year. They just were not my favorites. All right, that is it for this video. I know, pretty long. It wasn't scripted either, so I probably babbled on quite a bit. But I did want to share some extra love for the role-playing games that I really, really dug this year, that I was excited once I finished reading them, or I was like, wow, you know what? That really gets my creative juices flowing, or hey, I really dig these mechanics. So I wanted, once again, to share some extra love for these releases. And of course, they're all available digitally, as I had mentioned in the opening of this video. So if you want to save a little bit of money, you don't want to get the physical books, or maybe you feel it's more convenient to have them digitally. I know a lot of people are like that. You can easily do so. Alrighty. This is my last video for 2022. It is New Year's Eve as I record this, and I certainly am wishing all of you a very, very happy New Year. I'm certainly hoping that you're going to return to the Gaming Gang in 2023 and hang out and check out the videos and maybe watch live shows, visit the website. You never know. If you like this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this one, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs live Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Central, right here on YouTube. I have 4 new series that are premiering in 2023. Actually, I should say 3, because I've already rolled out the first episode of the Paizo previews. So if you haven't checked that out and you like Pathfinder and Starfinder, give that a peek. Stay tuned for the other 3. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Have a great new year. I look forward to seeing you again next year. And here's hoping each and every one of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang. Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.